Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is Great Big History Podcast. And today we do Ming Success and Ming Collapse. This is part 2 of the Ming. I'm going to do my best with the names. I'm not well practiced in them, so I apologize. I don't mean any insults to anybody. I'm doing the best I can. So, when we left off, the Ming had established themselves. And part of their establishment is what comes next. Ming exploration and diplomacy. This is the thing that pops out to people. This amazing moment in history. The Emperor Yongle, the third Ming Emperor, usurped his nephew in a palace coup to take over. Now, very Confucian. So he's got a problem. He's a usurper. He's not the legitimate emperor. He's got a problem of government loyalty. He's also the third emperor of a usurping dynasty who has kicked out, who has revolted against the Yuan dynasty, kicked out the Mongols. And so Yongle has a problem, is legitimacy. Why should anyone listen to him? He is the usurper of a usurper. So he's got a problem of government loyalty. But he's surrounded by these Muslim eunuchs, holdovers from the Mongols. And one of them is an impressive young Muslim man who's going to end up standing 7 feet tall. And he's Zheng He, which is spelled Z-H-E-N-G. And his last name, H-E. So he's a 7 foot, in an age where people stood 5'3", 5'4", he stands 7 feet tall. He's a young Muslim, and his grandfather was Persian. He had gone on the Hajj. He had worked at the Yuan court. And so you had all of these stories. And Zheng He tells these stories to the new emperor about stories of the West, of the sea, of the Hajj, of a cosmopolitan world beyond China. And the emperor sends him on 7 voyages. The 7 voyages from 1405 to 1433. These are the first Chinese naval expeditions into the Indian Ocean. Now, merchants had done this. Merchants had traveled this far. But this is the Chinese Navy doing this. And it has several reasons for existing. The first is diplomacy. It is to announce the Ming now run China. Oh, and by the way, Yongle is spelt Y-O-N-G-L-E in Romanized English. So the Ming now run China. Hi, you don't have to deal with the Mongols. We kicked them out. We're here. Just in case you were wondering about your trade with China, we're in charge now. It's to set up this tribute and alliance system. Remember, again, the fear that the Mongols might come back. And so the Mongols were tied into a wider world system. So here is China doing the same, tying themselves into world allies. Second is the trade connections. The Silk Road was ruined by Mongol civil wars, and so Tamerlane is the last of the great Mongolian conquerors. He wrecks northern India, what is today Pakistan, Afghanistan. I mean, everything just gets wrecked with Tamerlane. And so it's a way of making money. It's trade connections. The Silk Road is essentially shutting down. And so this is a way of making some money. And third is the coolness of discovery. you have all of these stories of the West. And China has a long history of stories of the West. And so you get to see new stuff. Wow, the people. Look at what the emperor can do. No one else could finance this stuff, could organize it, could get 10,000 soldiers to go to sea. Look at what the emperor could do this. So the emperor must be awesome since the emperor is doing this. You get to see things like giraffes for the first time, which is an animal that literally connects heaven and earth. So the Chinese are amazed by the giraffe. Of all the different animals that are brought back, it is the giraffe that just blows people's minds. Because here's an animal that's firmly on the ground, and yet its head, its most important part is in the air, is up, reaching up to heaven. So the very fact that this animal exists and has been brought back to China is evidence that the emperor, the Chinese Ming emperor, is awesome. These fleets are enormous. The first fleet has 317 ships, including 60 what were called treasure ships. These treasure ships were 400 feet long and 160 feet wide, 5 times the size of the Santa Maria Columbus sails to America. The fleet will have 30,000 men in it, merchants, sailors, soldiers, scientists, poets, to memorialize all this stuff. Merchants to make money, sailors to run the ships, soldiers to fight battles, fight pirates, scientists to figure out these discoveries that they're seeing, and poets. Remember, poets and artists. There's no way. What does it look like? What does the coast of East Africa look like? There's no pictures. There's no Instagram. So how do you bring this back? There's only 2 ways. One is art, painting, drawing, and the other is poetry, that you describe it. So poets go. These are also highly specialized fleets with highly specialized ships, tender ships, which take care of the other ships, which fix other ships, water ships, horse ships. These are all specialized. That's very modern. It's how our aircraft carrier fleets work. Where there's the aircraft carrier, and they're surrounded by some warships, but then those ships are surrounded by other ships that do specialized jobs. So this is a very modern, despite being in 1400, this is a very modern way of organizing a navy. Much different than Columbus and the early Portuguese explorers that basically just send out a ship. Go, good luck, see you later. Oh, you want 3 ships? Well, I guess, or you could find the money somewhere. Go! Like, Magellan comes, 1 ship of Magellan's come back. Magellan doesn't come back, but 1 ship comes back. Many times, or not at all. These fleets, the Ming fleets of Zheng He, could have discovered America. They are massive ships, bigger than anything else that the Europeans have at the time. What are the effects of these fleets? Answer is not much. They really don't do much. They don't have much of a lasting impact. Sometimes that's the effect. Confucian officials didn't like it. Why? Well, the Muslim officials are in charge of it. So clearly, the Muslim officials have power over this emperor. So Confucian officials don't like it. Why do you have to leave China? China's the greatest place in the whole wide world. Why go? And why be part of this world? The last time we were part of this world, it obliterated us. It hurt us. Why would you want to deal with it again? Later emperors didn't care. They didn't want to fight about it. They got into decadence. They got into themselves. They just didn't care. You needed an emperor who wanted to spend this money. The second thing is, it was too expensive for private soldiers and sailors to replicate. China didn't import anything. It didn't need much. And so since it didn't import much, the Chinese merchants could go, but they didn't bring much back, which meant half the trip was a giant waste. This is the opposite of the problems that will happen for the Europeans, where they make a lot of money on what they bring back from China. So it was worthwhile. China doesn't do that. China could sell stuff, but it was easier for other merchants to come to China. It's too expensive. Now, it will be expensive for Europeans. What the Europeans will do is invent corporations. This, in China, whether it's Confucianism or a whole variety of different philosophies, doesn't happen. A bunch of people do not pull resources to create a bigger pool of money in order to do this. One reason for that is that the Mongol threat, the land threat, is the bigger issue. Like, why are you spending money on these giant ships to go into the Indian Ocean when the Mongols might come back? And in fact, the Ming are going to spend money on the Great Wall. The wall you stand on today, the wall you go and take photographs of, the wall you Instagram, is built by the Ming. And so that diverts money from the ships. The Great Wall had to be built, was the idea, to keep the Mongols out. Now, the Mongols don't come back, so it turns out the Great Wall didn't need to be built, but that's a whole nother problem. You didn't know that at the time. Except that there are military expeditions to go and attack the Mongols, to make sure they don't come back, which are even more expensive than the Great Wall. Armies are always expensive. And so even Yongle will go out to invade the Mongols, to beat them up, make sure, hey, don't come back here. He'll die in 1424, he dies. The emperor dies in 1424. Zheng He will die at sea a decade later. He's like, at this point, he's too famous to like not go. He's finding all these cool things. It's this cool treat. But once he dies, the Confucian officials take over. The ships are impounded and they're left to rot. And this experiment that lasts for one emperor and one explorer dies. And in fact, as the Ming go on, they will make laws against ships going to sea. So what did the Ming do? Well, one thing they do is make foreign peoples Chinese. What's called Sinicize. Sinicize. They make foreign peoples Chinese. This is anti-Mongol. See, the Mongols let people be each other as long as you admitted the Mongols were awesome. And so it brought in all these people. The Ming are China for the Chinese, for the Han. And so you don't get to be too much of a foreign people anymore. You become Chinese. The capital is moved back to Beijing by the Confucian officials. Moved from Nanjing in the south to Beijing in the north. Why? Well, the emperor needs to protect the north. The emperor leads armies. The emperor needs to protect the north. The emperor is the only one with the legitimacy to either hire generals or to lead armies himself. And so he needs to be in the north. This is very typical. Roman emperors did this. This is how Constantinople gets built. You need to be near where the problems are. So it makes sense. It's not silly. So they moved back to Beijing, and then they level parts of it because there was a lot of Mongol buildings in it. So they were going to remember, this is China for the Chinese. So it's very expensive to, move all the government officials, move all the archives, move all the stuff you need, and you need to move the emperor as well. And so he's got to live in a city that's worthy of the emperor. So that's a lot of architecture. That's a lot of rebuilding. He can't live in a Mongolian frontier town, right? He's got to live in a capital. And so what they build is the Forbidden City, which is a city within Beijing, within the city. And it's for the court, it's for the emperor, but it's also, remember, the Mongols are going to come back. That's what people think. And so the idea is the Mongols will lay siege to Beijing. They may break into the city. They did it before. And so if they break into the city, what's going to happen to the emperor? Well, he'll have another series of walls protecting him. And the whole idea is to make it hard enough. It's a safe room. It's to make it hard enough for the Mongols to break into that armies from the south will be able to come in and rescue the emperor. That's the idea. So the Forbidden City is a city within Beijing. Now, what this leads to is imperial isolation. See, those walls that keep the emperor safe also keep the emperor inside, also keep knowledge inside. And so it's very easy for emperors to lose connection to the outside world, to forget what's going on. This is not weird. This happened to Roman emperors. This happens to American presidents. Every American president always somewhere in there, especially in their second term, gets the question somewhere along the way, what's the price of milk? What's the price of a gallon of milk? And the answer is they have no idea. They have not bought milk in at least 5 years, 6 years. They don't know. They live in the White House underneath a protective bubble of the Secret Service. And it's very easy to not go out. In fact, the Secret Service doesn't want you to go out. So the fact that Obama goes out and buys burgers at Five Guys was considered a big deal. Presidents just don't do this, which makes the White House claustrophobic. And every president will say that. This is true of the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is bigger than the White House, but it's also the walls that protect also keep isolated. And so what we're seeing is architecture. Not only culture, but architecture is keeping the Ming emperors from interacting with the world. And that's a huge difference. Remember, the first one, Hongwu, is a man of the people. He is a peasant. He is a Buddhist monk. He is a man of the people. He leads himself the empire. Yongle does much the same. He leads armies against the Mongols. So what we're seeing is a change in how the emperors behave. And as they change, China changes. They build a modern Great Wall. This is a failure of military power. Building a Great Wall is a great thing to go Instagram, but it shows you can't protect your borders in any other way. It means you're scared of what's on the other side of that wall. It means trade can't be regulated. It's a failure. Building a wall on your border is a failure. It also says this is as far as we're going. It tells everybody this is as far as we're going. You give up all the land on the other side. You'll never have it. You'll never use it. You don't want it, but you also don't want to trade with it either. And so there are gates in the Great Wall to allow trade, but they thus limit trade. It limits the movement of peoples. It limits the movement of ideas. So you get isolation of China from trade, people, and knowledge. You keep out people with their ideas. And the land route, remember, goes back to 100 AD. It is the way China connected to the world. So what Ming emperors are doing is cutting China off from the world. Now, the world does not stand still. The world is going to come knocking. But with the building of the modern Great Wall and the isolation of China on its western border, the idea is that China is turning inward. We see this even in its factories. In the early days of the Ming, they build massive factories. These huge businesses for the emperor, by the emperor, for domestic use. Silk, spice, luxury good exports, which makes sense. The Ming need money. They've taken over. They need money. They build massive steel factories. Far bigger than anything in Europe. Steel, it's not modern steel. It's this iron, better iron, but they use the word steel for it. It's not yet balsamer steel, which will be like Pittsburgh steel. That's later. So it's not like they had a head start of 500 years on the steel business, but they are talking like high-grade iron compounds, the best metal you can get. The best building materials, the best tool materials, far bigger than anything in Europe. We also have a silver-based economy. So we have coinage, and that coinage has a value and has a worldwide value because it has a percentage of silver in it. And so what happens is Chinese economics is efficient. It also means that Chinese money is worth something. It's expensive to buy and easier to sell. But it made others mad. And we'll see this in part 2 of our class, where they're mad. They say, this is not fair trade. Here, we have stuff. And the Chinese emperors and the Chinese officials say, we don't want your stuff. We want your silver. We want your money. And so there's this feeling that money is being sucked out of Europe into China. This is a feeling that modern 21st century leaders, including President Trump, think of when he talks about China, is our money is going to China. We have a trade deficit, and this money is being poured into China. It's our money. Now, our money is now paper. It's not worth anything of itself. It's worth what the market says it's worth. But there was this feeling that China was getting richer by making other people poorer. And it created resentment, just as it does in the 21st century. What are the Ming's problems? First is the emperors after Yongle are fairly useless. They get into decadence. Some have very long reigns in which they do very little. And so they're not... The Ming lose that edge that made them the Ming in the first 100 years. They're mostly useless emperors. And this is a system from the very beginning, like the Tang, who are built on an active emperor, an active leader. 2, the Muslim eunuchs lose power. They become nannies. Instead of being cosmopolitan and connected and worldly and invested in their connections to the Middle East, to Central Asia, to Indonesia, they become less cosmopolitan. They become nannies. They become these people that follow around the emperor and cater to his whims. They become comic figures in Western art later on. There's scenes in The Last Emperor of China, The Last Emperor, the movie. And you have this child running around as he's child emperor is like 5 years old. He's running around and he's just like humiliating these Muslim eunuchs who are catering to the whim of a 5-year-old. And now you're looking at this and saying, well, that's about, as an American, you say that's what kings do. Kings act this way. And look at these men humiliating themselves. But it's worse than that, because the story of those officials is they used to run the empire. They used to create massive fleets. They used to create navies and then man those navies and go out and explore. They built the Great Wall, and now they're a nanny to a child emperor. The Confucian officials who run the local and provincial levels, increasingly, and after Yongle, the national levels, are anti-global. And they're especially anti-Christian, anti-European. They don't like these ideas coming in, these foreigners from the West. So they try to keep out European trade and ideas. But as time goes on, they're also increasingly corrupt, selfish for their families. Unlike the eunuchs who can't have prodigy, the Confucian officials have Confucianism by itself has connections to other people and obligations. So you have obligations to your family, to the members of your family, but also obligations to the members of your in-laws, to the members of your city, to the members of your province. And so what you get is a lack of foremost loyalty to China. Why? Well, the emperor's useless. The emperor's not doing anything. The emperor doesn't command the loyalty. So why give it to him? Remember, Confucianism works both ways. It's not a one-way street. And so Confucian officials do things that make them increasingly corrupt. But the system is increasingly falling apart. And so it makes sense to be corrupt because you can benefit yourself and benefit your family, who you do have responsibilities to, who you do have obligations to. 4, China is clearly turning inward. We talked about this. It is weaker. It is poorer. It is isolated. It is Mongol obsessed. The Ming are falling behind. For the first time, when the Europeans show up in the 1500s, for the first time, the Ming start importing technology from somebody else. That's not what the Song did, S-O-N-G, the dynasty, the one that's destroyed by the Mongols. That's not what the Tang did. The Tang exported paper. The Song exported seafaring technology. Now China's importing, which shows it's falling behind. And 5, the Ming leadership is not prepared for disasters. All of that, 1, 2, 3, and 4, can be turned around. It's not fatal. Because if you could change, number 1, you could get a bunch of kick-butt leading emperors, and you could get a couple in a row, like the late Roman Empire kind of needed. If you could just get those, a Diocletian and then another bunch of kick-butt emperors, you get a Yongle again and a couple more after him, you could turn this around. There's so much potential. There's so much population. There's so much economic power. China can be turned around. But it doesn't. And because of this, it's not prepared for natural disasters, floods, and famines. And when that happens, the people turn to the government and say, help us. But because of 1, 2, 3, and 4, the emperors are useless, the Muslim eunuchs have no power, the Confucian officials are increasingly corrupt and isolated, and China has turned inward and is falling behind. There's no one to help them. And so there's no legitimacy at the top. So Confucianism is used against the Ming. Remember, the Ming used Confucianism to get loyalty. And now people are turning to the emperors and saying, you're bad. You're not helping me. If you're not going to help me, you're not Confucian. And so they use Confucian philosophy against the emperors. The emperors are incapable of fulfilling their responsibilities to their people. And so banditry, rebels, Japanese pirates, increasingly Manchu, who are nomadic nomads north of the wall, the Great Wall, east of the Mongols, and north of the wall, start raiding northern China. And increasingly, as things go bad, they compound because no one's trying to fix them, and they're getting worse, and they're getting worse, and they're getting worse. And what will happen is the Ming will collapse in fire and blood and destruction, and no one will mourn them. And even today, no one mourns the Ming. There's the one thing of the explorations that's seen as this great moment. But afterwards, the Ming are seen, even in Chinese historiography, as this kind of dead weight that needed to be excised, cut out, thrown off. It's such a far away from where it started. Thank you.